Hello and welcome to Climb's podcast series Advancing Vietnam with me, Vlad Savin, as your host. In this episode, I'm discussing with Rizwan Khan, managing partner of Climb Vietnam, about the manufacturing potential for foreign investors in country, looking at the digital transformation scope and development for companies active in Vietnam, and as well looking at trade agreements and the general 2024 expectations for investors in country. Rizwan, welcome to a new Advancing Vietnam podcast series. I'm very happy to have you here. This is your first one in 2024, and we look forward to many of these to have you as a guest.
Thank you very much, Vlad, and it's indeed an interesting podcast, especially on manufacturing sector in Vietnam.
That's right, as well, because the authorities, the Vietnamese government, have strong expectations on growing this industry pillar, specifically on GDP value starting from 30% of the entire GDP of Vietnamese economy, and potentially 45% of that just being the high-tech industry. So there's a lot of things and movements happening from a public perspective in the manufacturing sector. It's interesting to hear your thoughts as well on the private development.
Definitely. In Vietnam, manufacturing sector is one of the most important sector of economy, and according to some estimates, it is roughly about 25% of the GDP. And there are many reasons for that, and the reasons are that Vietnam has a resilience, it has a very robust supply chain, as well as the competitive labor cost and government initiatives to cover all these areas, and especially moving towards the smart manufacturing, what you call Industry 4.0. Definitely the future of manufacturing in Vietnam is really very bright.
And 2023, just to bring everything in the context, was very difficult year for manufacturers and exporters in country. That was due to the low demand coming in from significant markets like the US, China, Europe. And how does 2024 look from your perspective? What do you see in the market specifically after Q1?
Interesting question. The thing is that in 2023, before that, actually during pandemic, there have been an increased inventory around the globe, and that actually affected countries who are heavily relying on manufacturing, and Vietnam is no exception. And coupled with the high level of inventory, the very high transportation cost, especially in the shipping industry, that prevailed during 2021 and 22, there was a ripple effect of that coming in the manufacturing sector as well. So we have seen a slight decline in the manufacturing sector. However, in 2024, it looks very bright, especially when we are looking at the supply chain and all the conflicts going on around the world. I believe that for Vietnam, there is a very huge chance for increasing manufacturing sector by around 10%. So that growth is not only just the coming from organic growth, but also looking at that new companies that are coming in Vietnam, and especially when they are looking at the risk management perspective, what we call China Plus One policy. So Vietnam is coming up as a very good contender for that.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned China Plus One and a few other models where investors leverage the Vietnamese opportunities. Can you share your insights on the market entry model as a standard for investors that are looking at the manufacturing sectors? Obviously, the options for them are quite broad from an industrial zone location and exporting zone perspective, but how do they choose which specific location structure and industrial park is relevant for them from a negotiation and benefits perspective? What are some of the differences that make sense for investors, for example, industrial park or export processing area?
Actually, from the viewpoint of market entry, there are certain differences that exist. If you look at the manufacturing facilities, so we have two options. One is having a factory in industrial park, or the other one is in export processing zones. So what are the major differences between these two? If any organization is looking at exports only, then they should focus on export processing zones, because they may have better infrastructure, they may be closer to the ports, they are in the strategic locations where those could be beneficial for export oriented producers. When it comes to industrial park, so there are certain other benefits that export processing zone may not have. And one of that thing is that with a regular industrial park, companies can sell in the domestic market. So there are certain benefits that may be common, for example, tax incentives, for example, not paying import duty right away. However, export processing zone definitely has more benefits for those organizations. They only exports, because then they don't have to pay any import tariff from wherever they are importing from. However, for companies in industrial park, they may have to pay import tariffs for raw materials coming from non-FTA countries. Vietnam has more than 15 FTAs from different regions around the globe, but still there are countries that are not covered in that. So in that case, export processing zone factories are really a clear winner.
And you mentioned a lot about the FTAs, and it would be good if you can elaborate on the practicalities of this. So, a few years ago, the European free trade agreement with Vietnam was signed. That was one of the significant and major trade agreements that Vietnam has with the global parties. We have an Australian strategic partnership that was just signed a year ago. We have US and Vietnam trade agreement. We have the RCEP. We have the TCPP, and there's a few others that create that value for the Vietnamese economy and bring that positioning within the region as a top contender for investors in country. Do you see investors leveraging these trade agreements, and what are some of the significant ones that are really important for the manufacturing sectors?
It's quite interesting that a lot of investors, they are aware of these free trade agreements, especially those who have done their research properly. However, I have seen certain businesses, they are not really aware of existence of these FTAs. For example, EU Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, or in short we call EVFTA. That is really a game changer for Vietnamese manufacturers to export into the European Union countries. And then also, if you look at the impact of that, that would have roughly about more than 10% of increase in trade in the coming years. And that is only for the manufacturing sector. If you look at other FTAs, for example, with US or CPTPP, so these are also very interesting ones. What is more important is that the manufacturers, when they are looking at other countries in the region, there are certain countries, they may have some comparative advantage over Vietnam. However, with these FTAs, the gap between those countries and Vietnam is shrinking very fast.
From a tax break perspective, you mentioned tax benefits and potential delays within duties for import and export. What are some of the common tax breaks that investors may expect when discussing negotiating with industrial zones? And how are these, by comparison, matched with the global minimum tax that Vietnam just adhered to? Obviously, that applies just for large investors, but how is that general tax narrative and tax benefits, and where is Vietnam positioned?
Generally, for manufacturing companies, they have a standard tax break that could be up to 2 years of 0% corporate income tax, and for another 2 or 4 years of reduced tax liability. In addition to that, if the manufacturing factory is in an area that is disadvantaged, or for example, that have poor human development, then there are additional tax benefits are available to the companies. On top of that, if the manufacturing is in high-tech industry, then there are certain additional benefits that may lead up to 18 years of reduced or fixed tax for the manufacturing companies. And that is really a game changer, because if you look at that compared to other countries where the tax breaks are only for a certain period, regardless of making profit or not. However, in Vietnam, it is subject to making profit. And the losses that companies make in the past, that could be carried forward for a certain number of years.
Mm-hmm. And based on your experience, you've been in Vietnam for around 15 years plus, and you've been working as well within the manufacturing sector quite a lot. What are your takeaways from a practical perspective of some of the operational challenges that investors may expect when running, let's say, medium to large manufacturing facilities in Vietnam?
Um, I have been in manufacturing for over 10 years, and just like any good thing, there are certain challenges, and those could be infrastructure. And that means that proximity to the ports and availability of utilities, etc., in certain areas. Definitely in large cities, for example, in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, these things may not be a challenge. However, if we go to smaller cities, then these could pose certain challenges. Apart from this, the labor cost is quite competitive. However, managing uh, workforce is could be challenging at times, depending on the location, depending on the skill set, etc. For that, what we have done in the past is that we manage it with a very strong HR practices with certain incentives. I have been managing that with providing proper training as well as HR management, and also certain benefits that may not be mandatory. However, in terms of finance, they do not make a huge impact on the P&L, but that would definitely improve the productivity of the labor.
Manufacturing is quite a broad sector in Vietnam. There's many types of pillars. Part of the historical growth of FDI in Vietnam that started with agriculture, manufacturing, trading. In the last few years, the Vietnamese authorities created opportunities and started a narrative that has certain legal substance as well, to looking at the draft decrees that the authorities released to promote high-tech manufacturing, added value manufacturing, to be able to compete regionally with countries like Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia that have a very strong high-tech manufacturing sector. The goal for the Vietnamese authorities obviously is to bring that added value to the entire industry, and there elevate the workforce, the knowledge, the skills, and as well the revenue and the tax coming out of it. Specifically, the semiconductor industry and a few others aligned with this manufacturing pillar are promoted in the last at least 6 months in Vietnam, and we've seen quite a lot of interest coming in from some Taiwanese companies and US companies as well, with some very focused partnerships that the Vietnamese authorities are looking at signing and commencing in the near term. What is your experience with this transformation of the Vietnamese manufacturing into this high-tech product line function that will align as well with the needs of the global economy?
Vietnam, if you look at the economic growth, so it's fairly recently, as recent as 2006, when Vietnam started picking up and coming up the radar of the manufacturing companies and other businesses. From that perspective, during last 18 years, Vietnam has done wonders. Although the smart technologies are not very common in Vietnam, but Vietnam is going very fast in adopting towards that. Another factor is that IT sector in Vietnam is growing very fast, and that is actually adding to the growth in the high tech industry, especially with introduction of Vietnamese own EV. That also added a lot towards the chip manufacturing and other sectors as well. When we compare with Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia, those countries have been producing these things for quite some time. And Vietnam, being a new player, is going very fast. If you look at the technologies that have been right now, everyone is using, as recent as 8 years ago, those things did not exist. So if we look at smart technologies, definitely from the consumer point of view, they are being used widely. However, complex application, for example, in supply chain and other areas, is still there's a big gap, and that is definitely a good thing for manufacturers who already established those technologies in other countries. They could bring it to Vietnam, and they could become pioneer as well.
And you mentioned a lot about the technology growth and the exponential growth of the entire IT sector. that obviously reverberates into other sectors as well as manufacturing, logistics, as you mentioned it before. How is digital transformation impacting the broad manufacturing sector in Vietnam? What do you see in your experience for investors using new technologies and improving efficiency, improving productivity, and as well leveraging a more sustainable type of manufacturing activity as well?
If you look at sustainability and environmental protection, definitely Vietnam is adhering to ESG principles, and it may not be 100%, but Vietnam is working towards that. Also, if you look at the technology, so one of the biggest challenge in the adoption is that so far the high value added manufacturing is a very small percentage relatively as compared to overall manufacturing. So therefore, those smart technologies may not be in place for the time being. However, another factor that is actually hindering towards adoption of that is the low labor cost. Once those things improve, once the skill set of labor improves as well as the cost increases, then manufacturers will have more incentives towards implementing smart technology and going towards a true Industry 4.0. In my experience, what we have done in the past is implementing IoT as well as the real-time reporting that would be helpful for from the production management point of view.
And when you look at the broad perspective of why investors are looking specifically at the Vietnamese market from a manufacturing perspective, historically in the last 10 years, it was about large population, young, with a significant drive to work and to learn. Specifically, the labor costs were quite low, and it created that pool of talent and that the opportunity for that low base, low value manufacturing to thrive. Now, within the global competitive environment, that is obviously not enough, and that's why the authorities are pushing towards developing the manufacturing sector into this high-tech and high-value production model. What are some of the areas where Vietnam needs to improve to be able to answer to investors why Vietnam and not why Thailand or not why Indonesia in these days, in the present times?
As I mentioned earlier, and this is important from the skill set of labor, is still by and large, the labor force is not ready for very high-tech manufacturing. Traditionally, Vietnamese labor force have been working in areas such as garment, textiles, and food processing, etc. However, that has been changing, and in the last 5 years, there has been a significant improvement in the skill set of laborers. The other thing is that government has been promulgating a lot of new rules and regulations that are helpful for the organizations, especially when we look at the intellectual property rights protection. It may not be very high, however, it is improving. If you look at the innovation index of Vietnam, it has improved during last 10 years, and also the other factors that are improving. Last but not the least, during last 10-15 years, a very huge number of Vietnamese young people, they went abroad, they studied there, and they started coming back. So they are bringing it the much needed skill set in Vietnam economy, as well as they are bringing new ideas that are in developed countries, and all these things are coming. So from an international investment perspective, the biggest fear for the investors is that if they come to Vietnam, whether they could find the right infrastructure, the conducive environment, business environment, as well as the workforce. So, for example, Intel is a very good case study. When they started here more than 10 years ago, they struggled in the beginning, but however, they overcome that, and now they are doing wonders. And if you look at the other sectors, for example, Samsung and other brand names that are producing VinFast, for example. So all these are the clear winner in Vietnam economy in terms of leveraging on the domestic demand as well as utilizing the local workforce and developing the economy in Vietnam.
And I would add here as well the geopolitical positioning of Vietnam regionally and globally, where the authorities are looking at very, very strong partnerships with large jurisdictions across the globe, and as well investing in strong support sectors for the manufacturing industry, like the infrastructure, for example. I believe last year it was a 6% of GDP value investment in infrastructure in Vietnam. This year is projected to be the same. Digital transformation policies, and as well a broad range of support function for FDI in general. And I think investors are looking at that stability and are looking at that consistency of legal development and commercial development of the economy in Vietnam.
Definitely. I mean, all these factors are very important, and they are playing definitely a very decisive role in for the investors when they are coming to Vietnam.
Rizwan, unfortunately our time is up. Thank you so much for joining this podcast about the manufacturing sector in country. Very happy to hear your practical insights based on your experience.
Thank you very much, Vlad. It was an interesting discussion with you.
Thank you. Vietnam has many advantages to attract foreign direct investment in manufacturing, including a stable business environment, openness to new generation free trade agreements, and an abundant labor force. Additionally, preferred policies for foreign investors continue to demonstrate Vietnam's open foreign investment policy by reducing some administrative procedures for investment. However, technological advancements, infrastructure investments, and consistent government policies to facilitate FDI in manufacturing are needed to bolster a powerful economic environment where Vietnam can capture and convert regional investments. Thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in to Advancing Vietnam podcast series. For more information about this topic, please check out our publications on vietnam.ecline.com. And if you want to reach out to us for any additional details, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or throughout the website contact details.